see it on the left corner.
No, I don't see it. That's unfortunate. I can only see my PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please welcome Ulrike Grimm. She will introduce us management of vendor performance and risk. I'd like to introduce Ulrike. Ulrike is an expert in ensuring successful operational execution and excellent team performance with a track record of developing drugs from research to the market launch. She has extensive experience in the leadership of multicultural and cross-functional project teams within research and development in phase 1 to 4 clinical studies, international product launches, portfolio and alliance management. Over to you, Ulrike.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for this kind introduction, and thanks for the organizers that I have this opportunity to share with you my experience of management of vendor and vendor performance and also risk. So for those who don't know me, I would like to briefly outline a little bit of my background. Actually, I work as an independent consultant as of 2019, and before I was several years with Vifor Pharma in Zurich, Switzerland, in different roles as project management, clinical operations head, as well as project and alliance management. And my focus is really on R&D projects, so development as well as lifecycle management of pharmaceutical drugs, where we also did lots of phase 4 clinical studies. And before that time, I worked at a small startup like Fresenius Biotech, as well as a mid-sized pharma company, Merck, which is now Merck Serono, Merck KGaA. So let me introduce to you what I want to touch upon in today's talk. The key success factor in vendor management starts with the appropriate, or with the selection of the appropriate vendor or CRO. The second key success factor is the management of the vendor-sponsor interactions. Next, I would like to focus on agility in project and study management. And last but not least, I will look into the relevant key performance indicators and also share with you vendor scorecards. So let's start with the first key success factor, which is the selection of the appropriate vendor. And for sure, you need the expertise in the therapeutic areas, the experience that you also want to see what the vendor did before, so really track records and their key performance indicators of prior projects, the capabilities of their staff, also the capacities. The quality is very important, also geographical requirements. Then it's a big difference whether your project is big enough that you have a dedicated team or not, or whether the people who work on your project would also work on other projects. The cultural team fit should be considered. And probably in most of the organizations I worked with, we do have budget constraints. Very rarely you have such a high priority project that budget is not really a limiting factor. Usually I look also towards recommendations from peers that I know from my network. Have they worked with a certain vendor? What was their experience? And the vendor themselves may also provide you with references from prior customers. In my experience, also the vendor size is quite important, depending, because I have worked in bigger pharma as well in startup companies. So starting in the left corner, if you have a global vendor that has advantages like uniform processes, they have the critical mass, they usually have dedicated teams and have unique processes across the region. So this is the really of an advantage. On the other hand, if you look at the disadvantages of global vendors, you have more overheads leading to higher cost. You may have geographical silos between Europe and the US. And if you are a smaller pharma company, your business may be not that important to a big vendor, and that also means if something, if you look into risk or mitigation plans, that you might not get the right level of attention that you would like to get. If we move to the right-hand side, the local and or regional vendors, smaller ones, of course, if you are a small company, there's definitely the advantage that you are maybe as important to them as they are important to you. They may also be more flexible, have lower level of bureaucracy, and also with less overhead, lower costs. The flip side of the coin is that with local and regional vendors, the question is, how experienced is the staff, because they may have to do multiple roles, so maybe they are not that much experienced in individual areas. How is the team stability? If someone leaves, maybe it's not so easy to restaff as compared to bigger vendors. And of course, as a sponsor with smaller CROs or vendors, you may have to use several CROs, which increases the effort of management of the interfaces and alignment on the side of the sponsor. So now moving forward, you usually have a request for proposal, and I think it's really also your duty as a sponsor to ensure that the scope is clear, the objectives, the requirements, that really the vendor understands all the deliverables and expectations, also about timelines, milestones, and if there is a budget limit. I think this also should be shared, that you are transparent upfront about all of your objectives, deliverables, expectations, timelines, and budget. If it comes to then the vendor proposal, you get this written proposal, and there already I think you can make a very good evaluation, just assessing this written proposal. So does the vendor also provide own approaches, own thoughts beyond what you had asked them to do based on their past or recent experience? They may really come with opposite views, and do they mention the risk, or do they just want to please you? I always appreciate if they mention risk, if they think critical, if they already include, as we just heard before from Peter, it's important to think in solutions. So here the point is, do they already include mitigation strategies for certain risks? And do they think in scenarios? Do they have like best case, realistic case, worst case? Or do they already do some simulation, which I think is very positive if they have this approach. After you have this written proposal, usually you go for a bid defense meeting with your vendors, and there I find it quite interesting to see who is presenting. Is it the team that would work with you, or is it the senior management? And I have seen both cases, and definitely I prefer to see the team presenting who would later work with the sponsor team, because then you have much better assessment of the cultural fit, and also to see the level of engagement of the team members. You will then, of course, assess the expectations of the sponsor. Does that really match with the vendor's assumptions? You can discuss this in more detail and see whether you agree on these approaches, and also very important for vendor management oversight. And what I find very important is the question, who pays for delays? You may have a preferred provider, you may have a partnership. On the other hand, I have also seen cases where you budget for a certain scenario, and if that is not the case, then the sponsor would pay for the delays with change orders. So I am very interested always to sort this out at a very early stage. And this really shows, and that's why I think face-to-face meetings are so important, that you see how is the commitment, how is the attitude, because that is really then what later drives this team spirit and the solution orientation, the proactiveness. That is what you want to have, right, in your team. So that's why I think it's very, very important to see those people that would be on your team to check for commitment and attitude. Well, afterwards, I recommend and have made very good experience with a written vendor assessment to give everyone of the sponsor team the option to provide their feedback and to discuss it using either a scoring approach to compare these relevant criteria, or a color code where usually I go with like traffic light, red, yellow, green. Are there any showstoppers, or what is particularly good? What is more as expected? And I will show you in the next slide how this could look like with a scoring approach. But before we go there, it's also important, and that's of course critical, and you all know it, to do the vendor qualification audit, because there could be situations where I have seen also with the bigger vendors where you wouldn't have expected it, that in particular or in specific sites that there were problems, and that we had surprises that we could not go ahead. So the audit results are, of course, very important, and if that's not okay, that would be a showstopper, as you all know. So let's look in the other areas or evaluation criteria. And here you see a vendor scorecard, a very simple one before award, where you look in the first column, you have the evaluation criteria. And of course, you can make it as complex as you want. You can add as many as you want. Usually, I think 5 to 10 is a good starting point. Expertise, budget, team fit, I have chosen here, and feasibility considerations, scenario planning, the proactiveness here, and then you give it a certain weight. And in the next column, you then score, and this, of course, should then be a team discussion of the sponsor team. What are the have the expectations been met? That's like 3, the average, or have they not been met, or have they been exceeded? And that you multiply with the weight to give you a weighted rating, and by that you sum up in this case with a 3.9, which is quite a good score compared to the maximum of 5. You can also add comments, because just the poor numbering might not always be sufficient. So whatever you want to mention, what you want to be considered, put it as a comment in the last column, so that this helps you to maybe for a steering committee decision to show transparently on what basis you came to the recommendation of a certain vendor, which one you want to proceed with. Okay, and when it comes to the contract and statement of work, I think it's very important to take sufficient time for careful negotiation, not to run into it, really to prevent later costly change orders. The contract should also outline, to my experience, even though you just want to start this collaboration, but nevertheless, you also should think of termination criteria, for example, for non-performance, if there is a constant failure to meet timelines or poor quality in the services, because then you have transparency right from the beginning of all the expectations and all the the key performance indicators. One other interesting aspect is the trial finances. And here you could make the payments contingent on the achievement of milestone, not related to timelines, if that is what you have agreed more in a partnership approach. For example, certain time points of site initiation or recruitment of patients, 25, 50, 75, 100%, achievement of patient data clean, database log study report, or which could be independent of the timelines, which I think is a quite interesting model of finance structures for projects, or in this case, it's related to clinical studies because that is a big majority of the projects I do. Now, we look at the second topic, which is the management of the vendor-sponsor interaction. And the most important thing is, as we heard before with the teams, here again, it's the partnership approach, that you really have a joint mentality of good collaboration and trust. And it's also my experience that face-to-face meetings from time to time really do help to build this collaborative approach and a trustful working atmosphere. Rigorous upfront planning, I can't emphasize this enough, and frequent communication is really a key success factor here to achieve later on the objectives that you want, and to agree upfront on the performance measures and the key factors as well of problem solving. Regarding the contract, you could also foresee a mediator instead of before you escalate, right? I think you can be really creative to think in solutions, and a mediator can often help rather than, as we heard before, a blame culture does not help at all. So transparency, openness, and really frequent communication is of utmost importance. And as I said before, in the contract, it should be fixed. What are the metrics? What are the finances? What are the roles, responsibilities? And also have a written communication plan, including the governance. I will show you later on more details to that. And very important is also the written vendor oversight plan. What are you doing as a sponsor to ensure oversight? Of course, you review the SOPs, but what is your regular meeting schedule? What about, we heard it before, progress reports? You could do it monthly, but you could also do it bi-weekly, depending on the nature of the projects, to fix decisions and issues in decision logs and issue logs. These are very important parameters to ensure and also demonstrate in writing later that you do have this oversight as the sponsor. So rigorous planning, this is key for success. I now refer again to clinical studies because these are very often the projects that we do in R&D. So are the protocol inclusion-exclusion criteria practical? Do we have enough sites and patients available? How many countries and sites would we need? Is the patient and all the locations, is that all feasible just from an operational point of view? The site equipment, I have really seen also scenarios where we had to buy certain equipment for sites, and we only found out during the conduct of a study, which is of course not good. We should know this up front. The same of shipment of samples, regulatory requirements. The startup schedule differs very much from country to country, the enrollment rate, the expected dropout rate, the risks. This is, of course, at the start, an anticipation or an assessment based on also the discussions with the sites, with certain KOLs. And it should be summarized in a written feasibility assessment report, so that you here also have full transparency of what were the underlying assumptions when you started your project, or in this case, your clinical study. And the question is, who should, I think this is something that often I came up with this question, who should do this feasibility analysis? And I think it's really good not to leave it completely to the CRO, but to challenge those assumptions also as a sponsor, to be involved, so that you feel on top of having understood all of the assumptions, and yeah, that you have a good understanding of the likelihood of certain scenarios. If you have a partnership agreement, maybe you can rely more on delegation. If you really share the profits as well as the loss, share the risk, share the rewards, like the money saved of your contingency money. I have seen, on the other hand, cases where feasibility was left purely to the CRO, and then later on the sponsor did not fully understand the risk, and there were surprises when it came to delays or certain risks. That's why I think it's really good that both the sponsor and the vendor should be involved fully in this feasibility analysis and have a good understanding of the scenarios and the risks. The second plan that I recommend to really spend time and effort is the patient recruitment plan, including a contingency. We already did assess it in the feasibility, but here you come with numbers where you calculate how many sites give you how many patients in what period of time, and where are the sources of the patients. What is the advertisement? What are the payments to patients? So to make it all fit together. And this is probably you all have used this before. So during the start of a study, your recruitment is very low. So the yellow curve in the beginning, like November, December, does not have a steep slope. So you may not be able to see a lot. That's why at the beginning of a study, it's very good to focus on the site initiation and track that very closely. That's, in my experience, a much better indicator at the beginning than the number of randomized patients. And you just then have to multiply the number of sites cumulatively with the recruitment speed to come up with your assumed or planned number of randomized patients per month, which gives you then cumulatively the yellow curve, which is your expected randomization or patient recruitment curve. This is all the plan, and then next to it you would have the actuals, so that you always know, where are we? Are we on track? Yes or no? And if you are already at a delay with site initiation, it's very hard to catch up, and you should you have very early warning signals here, which is good, because the sooner you know it, the more options you have to take mitigation plans and to find solutions. And what helps you with this rigorous upfront planning is or are external and internal benchmark. If you have already experience in a certain therapeutic area, you can learn from your past experience of these projects. How long were timelines? What were the costs? What were known sites that are very, very good recruiters, or what were known risks? And it's very good to capture these internal benchmarks in a systematic way to really have lessons learned from it. If you don't have that much experience, maybe a startup, I think you all know that you can buy these external benchmarks, where you share then with industry best practice on timelines, also success rates, general information on sites. And this is, for example, from Clarivate or previously CMR International, timelines from that you can buy from protocol approved to first patient enrolled. They have generally here 4.5 months, more or less, and this helps you to set the stage for your own performance indicators as a guidance. This is an example from a smaller pharma company. That's why we, for example, decided in this case, from a study protocol to first patient first visit, we choose 6 months instead of what best industry practice was. It also may depend on your therapeutic area, so you can buy those external benchmark, also therapeutic area specific. And then I think it's a good idea to, if you have not yet started your internal benchmarking, to set yourself timelines that you want to achieve, and then to track against this. And this helps you also to detect early on deviations where you can then take countermeasures and look into reasons for it to find improvements. Okay, so even if you did the best rigorous upfront planning, unfortunately, I have to say, expect the unexpected, because unfortunately, there are always things that you cannot, the unknown unknowns, things that you know, that you don't know. Of course, you can have contingency for, but the unknown unknowns will always give you a challenge. And for that purpose, I think it's really good early on, before you start, I have alluded to this communication plan, to establish this escalation pathway or the governance, how you want to deal with your vendor. Of course, the ideal case is that the clinical study team or the project team from sponsor and the vendor would resolve the issues at the team level. But sometimes you have opposing views and it's not possible. That's why you may want to escalate to a next higher level, where you have maybe experts that have even a broader expertise, like the department heads or group leaders, so that you involve then from both sides, from sponsor and vendor, the department heads or group leaders. And if that does not lead to resolution, I have also had for bigger projects a pre-established governance committee that either would meet only on a need-to-do basis, or we could also, in one case we had monthly meetings where we also reviewed the progress. In that case, it was not just escalation, but was also a progress overview committee, and that is good to in a friendly way to really find solutions early on, if this is clear to everyone and you have transparency right up front how you will deal with opposing views here or issues. Okay, so in the next key success factor, we look into agility in project and study management. And as you know, in the pharma industry, we cannot really do scrums. We have to, agility is more thinking in scenarios, and the rigorous planning unfortunately does not prevent delays or any issues to pop up. For example, if you look into a recent study from IQVIA 2018, 80% of studies are delayed. And I think we also heard yesterday that a lot of other projects are delayed. 60% of trials have time-consuming and expensive protocol amendments, and protocol amendments, the range of cost is between 100 and 500,000 in my experience. So it's really quite expensive, several $100,000 or dollars. Nearly 50% of sites miss their enrollment target. 11% of sites never enroll single patients. And also, in my experience, you may have heard this number, 30% of sites, even though you did a careful site selection, enroll just 1 or 0 patient, which is a pity. But as change is everywhere, you could have a change of principal investigator, you could have a more competitive trials. I mean, the evaluation you did at the study start is never the one that, the situation that you face then during the study. And that's why the agility in vendor management or in projects is really in the way of thinking and behavior, to think in mitigation, in actions that you can take quickly. And the start of the collaboration, my recommendation is really start early. Choose your vendor early so that you can have the feedback from the vendor as early as possible for your project plan, so that you use their expertise as well, the vendors as well as the sponsors. Plus that the vendor may have other sources that you have access to only by having this vendor relationship early on, to develop the best project plan and include as many perspectives as possible. So for clinical trials, in addition to KOLs, also smaller sites can give you valuable input. Often you only focus on big sites or KOLs, but that might not be representative for the whole conduct. Or ask, we often speak about patient centricity, but ask yourself, who is really reaching out to patient organizations or to caregivers to get their feedback on how operational or how practical is a study, or if it's other projects, think of who are your stakeholders and ask as many stakeholders as possible, so that you have multiple perspectives that give you a more comprehensive view of the practicability or operationability of your project or study. Second, I have made the experience that the clinical sites really prefer, if possible, if you have the resources, to have a contact person from the sponsor in addition to the vendor. This gives you as the sponsor access to direct feedback, no filtering by the vendor. Also, you can use it as in a very positive way to build relationship with these investigators, and you collaborate more at eyes height, really as partners, and the sites feel appreciated if they can have access to this contact person. So this is really beneficial for the overall conduct of clinical studies. Proactive risk management is the next factor in my experience here. In agility, always have a plan B. We already alluded to backup sites, backup countries, alternative sources of patient pools. Also, rigorous replanning. Of course, we want to avoid protocol amendments. First time right is of course better and less expensive. On the other hand, if you have to do it, then also go for it and don't wait too long. And here, as a contingency, I think it's always good to have 10 to 20% of a budget reserve at the sponsor's site. Depending on your study, maybe more, but this is a general approach here. And this risk assessment and scenario planning is really an ongoing evaluation of the options. It never stops. It only stops when you stop your project. So you should. So we start in this circle in the upper right corner, and you try to forecast the future and see what could come. It's really looking at what if scenarios, yeah? What could happen, to think ahead of the futures, that you are well prepared if it happens. and assess the impact on the project. What would be mitigation plans? How much cost would I need for it? How much additional people would I need for it? And if it really happens, then you have it already in the drawer. You just can execute it. And that gives you, of course, a much better time advantage if you have evaluated and assessed these options, or how you would address certain issues or risks. And also it makes you and your stakeholders more comfortable that you're really on top and can manage the project effectively. Now, looking at the last topic, this is the key success factor number 4, the relevant key performance indicators and the vendor scorecard. So the obvious key performance indicators in clinical trials is to track the progress, because as soon as you know it, the earlier you can take proactive problem-solving activities. And in my experience, we have always differentiated here the study startup, study conduct, study evaluation, and finance is always a topic plus the issues. At the start of a study, as we said earlier, you look in the number of initiated sites versus plan or versus the total number. You can also look as an earlier indicator in the number of contracts that have been executed versus plan. In the study conduct, the major focus is on screen failure rate or randomized patient actual versus plan, the monitoring visit reports and the visits, the number of protocol non-compliances. Of course, you want to keep it as low as possible. In study evaluation, it's very important to get the case report forms cleaned and the number of patients cleaned as soon as possible, so that your medical review plan is on track, and you will always look whether your budget is on track. And within these status reports that you get either monthly normally or dashboards with these KPIs, you will be able then to see early on, if you track this, plus the quality of the data, you could say number of amendments, or as we said here, the number of protocol non-compliances, you will have early indication of whether you are on track, yes or no. And the earlier you know, the better you can take mitigation plans and find solutions. If you look at other projects, a simple milestone tracker might also help you to, as we said earlier, also towards management. You don't want to share with them. I also don't do it the very long Gantt chart, but rather take those milestones that are indicators of the progress, and compare your initial plan towards either achieved or a new planned date looking into the future. And I'm often using the traffic light approach, because then the senior management sees at one glance whether you are on track, whether it is at risk. In this case, it's a deviation of 1 to 2 months. And if it is more than 2 months, it is already a red color here. And to the right, I think in my experience, senior management here wants to know, what does it mean for budget? What does it mean for other qualitative objectives, or for the overall achievement of the objective? And always it's good to have a comment column where you can give more details that might be important for sending out to either your board or steering committee to help them understand and get the message. And as the vendor scorecard, I have here a second example, which is good to do this evaluation at the end of the study or at the end of the project, where you would really then assess, have the timelines been met? In this case, no, very poor, they have not been met. You again multiply the score with the weight give you a weighted rating of 0.3. And the same you do, for example, for quality, deviations, data, trial, master file, very important to keep that in mind. How's the quality there? The budget, were there huge deviation? Yes, no. Here the quality and budget was met, and the communication agility was perfect, exceeded. Unfortunately, timelines have not been met. So in this case, you would wonder, maybe feasibility assessment was not so good, and you would put something in the comments of why, if you have any rationale or reason why the timelines have not been met. And this gives you also a very good tool at hand for future businesses. If you do this in a systematic way and you assess your vendor, then for next time you have already documented performance criteria, which I think helps you a lot. And with this, I conclude my talk. So I think first take-home message is that vendor management starts with a thorough vendor selection process and its documentation. The rigorous planning and to have all those plans in writing ensures excellence and oversight in the vendor management during the conduct of the project. Oh, sorry for that. The agile vendor management addresses risks early on. Always think in scenarios and look for solutions early on, even for potential issues. And last but not least, tracking of the performance by these key performance indicators generates transparency, and this ensures that you can very early on address it and find solutions. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ulrike. Thank you for the presentation. We have one question from Miriam. Can you please give an example of exit strategies in case you really don't want to continue with a vendor, particularly with ongoing projects?
Yeah.
Some example of exit strategies.
Pardon?
Some examples of exit strategies.
Yeah. Actually, we had that case once, and it was a huge effort. So it's of course the last that you want, but nevertheless, we had the case where we worked with the CRO, and the CRO then during the conduct of the study was sold to another CRO, and then we had huge difficulties to keep with delays to keep within the budget, and unfortunately we were really constrained in the budget, and we did not see that the new management of the CRO was helping us, and this is where we finally said, okay, it's better to have to stop it and not to continue and to switch to another CRO. Before having these endless discussions with the new management, where also the atmosphere deteriorated. And luckily, because we had this clause that the budget, if it is exceeded by a certain percentage, that we could stop the collaboration, and we finally did that.
Thank you. Okay, we reached our time. There are no more questions. Thank you for the presentation, Ulrike. We will have now a networking break, and then we go on with panel discussion, risk management tips.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ulrike, for a wonderful presentation. So up next, we've got networking break. What you can do within the next half an hour, there are a few options for you. you can definitely grab a coffee or tea and then get back to network with others. There is an opportunity to go to networking. It's like speed dating for professionals. You'll get 20 to 180 seconds, which is like 3 minutes, to introduce yourself, discuss one of the issues that you're having, or decide to continue the talk later on, either on LinkedIn or on our new community platform called PPM Workout. Many of you were asking me, how did we come up with such a name? So PPM Workout basically tries to highlight the fact that for you to keep being strong and resilient in your job, you need to put regular exercise, regular effort to educate yourself, to meet with like-minded professionals, and to build meaningful relationships that have some effect. So PPM Workout is a community-based platform to grow your impact. There is a specific booth where during the lunch break, I'll be running a demonstration on like how to use the platform, how you can join it, and so on and so forth. Another option for this break is to join the sessions. We've got a Q&A session where you can discuss different topics that were not covered in the presentations. So you can either meet with panelists or speakers or other delegates to discuss whatever was presented during the event. And then we've got another 2 breakout rooms, so join according to your preference. And last but definitely not least, we've got Expo area, where you can learn something more about the masterclasses that we are running. Those masterclasses are led by project manager champion Antonio Rodriguez, who you could see yesterday, who you could see yesterday speaking, and you can learn a lot about project management and the strategy, how to apply it. And another masterclass that we're running is led by Dr. Richard Bainey, and it's about decision analysis. He's a wonderful speaker, and there's plenty of things you might have to ask. And we've got our colleagues to answer all your questions, concerns. They will also give you a discount. So make sure to go check it out in the Expo area. So that's it from me right now, and I'll see you later for the next presentation.